The first crack was not a scream, nor an argument. It was a glass displaced 2 fingers to the right on the kitchen counter, as if that house itself wanted to remind who truly ruled the place. The morning entered through the window with a pale light, yet the air felt heavy, an air that did not move curtains nor perfume the freshly toasted bread. She woke before the sun, out of habit and instinct, and walked barefoot, trying to domesticate the silence with small gestures, heating the water, mentally counting the steps to the hallway, folding the towel beside the stove. The glass out of place was not just a glass, it was a message. Here, everything has a position, and if you don't know it, someone else does for you. He, in the bedroom, slept peacefully, his broad chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, innocent of the invisible choreography that governed those rooms. His mother, in the room next door, breathed like one who watches even while dreaming, and the house, entire, seemed to listen. The hallway held old photographs in bright frames, polished enough to reflect the faces of those who hurried past. In one, he was a child, smiling in his mother's arms. In another, his graduation, ribbon at his neck, and her pride painted across her expression. Opposite, the portrait of the father, serious, absent long enough to become both a banner of longing and an argument of authority. She passed by those stories that were not hers and tried to fit in. The mother-in-law's voice arrived before her actual presence, a question that was not a question. Too early to light the stove, don't you think? Followed by that smile that bites from the inside. Of course, she said, and turned off the flame as if extinguishing a piece of herself. The wall clock marked an exact hour, but time there ran by another account. The account of discipline, of comparison, of the compliment that comes with a hook. When he appeared in the kitchen, hair messy, body warm from sleep, she shrank slightly without noticing. He embraced her with affection, and the mother, standing at the door, remarked, "Careful not to wrinkle your shirt, son. There's an important visit today." It was a common phrase, but it carried with it the dust of an idea. The touch of love is inconvenient when it does not fit the house rules. There was a list of chores on the refrigerator, handwritten, firm letters, as if defining maps and borders. It was not a list to help, it was a list to remind whose territory it was, who checks, who corrects. No need to follow it strictly, the mother-in-law said, offering a smile that shut doors. It's just to organize our day. And "our" there sounded like a pronoun that expelled. She, trying to be part, offered to fetch bread, to wash the dishes, to water the plants that, in a ceramic yard, insisted on being green. "Oh, my dear, let me do it my way, all right? Every house has its order." The word order had weight, had key, had password. The house, in that way, raised its first invisible wall, the wall of armored routine, of rough gentleness, of the "let me do it" that disarms any attempt at belonging. Her love for him existed, immense, but love, there, became something for a frame, beautiful to see, useless to move the hands of daily life. Breakfast unfolded like a small formal dinner, folded napkins, aligned plates. The question about sugar asked like a veiled reproach. "Do you always take it that sweet?" The tone did not offend on the surface, but pierced within, and with every spoonful of sugar, she felt she was signing a certificate of inadequacy. He laughed, said that such nagging was affection, that his mother spoke that way with everyone. "Don't mind, love, it's just her habit since forever." And there came the second wall, made of glass, the normalization of discomfort. If everyone accepts, why don't you? If it has always been that way, why would you change it? She breathed deeply, tried to reply lightly, but the body, wise, gave signs. A discreet knot in the stomach, a tiredness unfitting for the hour, a shiver whenever the mother-in-law entered the room and rearranged objects she had just adjusted. Always 1 centimeter different, enough to register on the invisible map that the daughter-in-law's hands did not decide the coordinates. In the afternoon, the light struck the wooden floor, and the distant sound of the street reminded her that other worlds with other logics existed. You could hang the towel like this. The sofa looks better if no one sits on the left side. The window only opens this far because it gets too windy. Better not to touch the curtain. This is the right soap. That is the right pan. The right subject is none. A catalogue of normative courtesies that built a fence without a fence. If anyone asked, it would be impossible to point out the wire, yet it scratched the skin, line by line. She, with the best will, tried to turn arbitrariness into agreement, command into coexistence. She smiled, yielded, adjusted. He, between work and the living room, dropped phrases that unknowingly repeated the house's chorus. That's just how Mom is. You know she wants what's best for us. Don't mind her way. Her heart is good. The third wall then rose complete. Love as a crutch for abuse. The beautiful bridge that leads back to the same captivity. At dinner, the chairs had owners. The stories had owners. Laughter had an owner. The mother-in-law narrated memories filled with sacrifice, drew out themes in which she was inevitably the protagonist. The illness of the past overcome by strength, the doubled work, the sleepless nights raising a son alone. Each memory a brick of moral authority. There was no way to compete with that without seeming unfair, and she did not want to compete, she only wanted to exist. When she began a sentence about her own family, the mother-in-law interrupted with hurried delicacy. How lovely, dear, but let me tell you something that happened with the neighbor the other day. The interruption was soft, but it was a cut. He, without noticing, followed his mother's rhythm, turning his head, asking for details, laughing at the same metaphors. And she, inside, tied her will into a knot. If she spoke too much, she would be too sensitive. If she spoke too little, she would be cold. If she disagreed, she would be ungrateful. If she agreed, she would be submissive. The arithmetic of belonging there came with calculations that always closed against her. There were small clandestine rituals that kept her standing, smelling the freshly cut mango at the sink, breathing in the scent of clean clothes on the clothesline, listening to music quietly on her phone while mopping the floor so as not to wake anyone, leaning her forehead against the cold bathroom tile and counting to 100. In the house mirrors, she learned to control her expression so it would not be recorded as defiance. In the hallways, she trained light steps so as not to sound inconvenient. In her words, she learned to place cotton so they would not hit the wrong ear. Life, without scandal, was becoming narrow, and no one but her noticed. When she woke in the middle of the night, the silence gained noises, the refrigerator breathing, the clock ticking, a drop insisting in the faucet. The house had lungs, and each sigh of the room said, "You are under observation." He loved her, that was true, and perhaps that truth deceived him, because he believed love was enough to mend reality. She knew of his love, and perhaps that bound her more, because she believed love was enough to forgive reality. On sunny days, he took her to the yard to have coffee together, said he liked the way she tied her hair, that her laughter lit up the afternoon, that soon they would go to a place just for them. The word soon grew roots in the garden of promises. The mother-in-law, hearing from afar, appeared with a tray of fruit and a comment about bills, visits, commitments. Soon returned to the vase, into the shade. They looked at each other tenderly, exchanged affection, swore small escapes on Sundays. But Sunday came with mass, lunch with relatives, the building meeting, the game on television. The hours had old and jealous owners. She tried to bring the world inside herself, since inside that house, only her mother-in-law's world fit. She read texts about boundaries, about non-violent communication, about respect and autonomy. She rehearsed dialogues in the mirror, sentences with possible scenarios, elegant responses to malicious questions. One night, she gathered courage and proposed a conversation at the table. She wanted to suggest delicate, small changes, symbolic openings of windows. She said she could cook on Wednesdays, that she liked the towels arranged differently, that she missed choosing the movie at night. The mother-in-law listened to everything with the eyes of a saint and answered as if giving a blessing. "Of course, dear. Here you are part of the family." And the next day, the pot she used was placed in the top cupboard, unreachable without a ladder. The remote control disappeared for 2 hours. The salt was put into a jar identical to the one with sugar. The clothes she washed were washed again later, because it was cold and they hadn't dried properly. Each gesture was covered with sugar, but it was salt on the wound. The neighbors saw little, because curtains are also walls. Even so, sometimes at garbage time, a tired expression escaped. A broken "good evening," a smile that apologized for existing. A man from the next apartment, discreet and cordial, noticed the change in the way she walked. He saw the opaque look, noticed the weary cadence, perceived the haste to leave and the haste to return. as if the world were a short line between two obligations. He did not know the plot, only sensed the atmosphere. The house, from the outside, was clean, organized, functional, but inside it smelled like a basement damp that never sees the sun, and that dampness clung to her skin like wet clothes. As nights went by, a new shadow appeared. Beyond the noises of the house, there were thoughts hammering repeated phrases. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe I need to adapt. Maybe I'm not enough. The mother-in-law, without raising her voice, planted seeds of doubt as if watering a bonsai. You've been a little sensitive, my dear. I wouldn't want to see you like this. Here, it has always been calm. I think you're not used to a close family. I treat everyone the same, including my son. Ask him. And he, with his heart in the right place and his eyes diverted from the obvious, agreed with some part because he wanted peace, and his peace was built with agreements that cost him nothing but cost her everything. The word sensitive took the form of an accusation, and sensitivity, which should be a talent, became a flaw. One late afternoon, she sat on the bedroom floor, leaned her back against the bed, and hugged her knees. She did not cry. There was no water left. She stayed there, listening to the house breathe, remembering when their life fit into two backpacks and a faith so strong it made noise. They had promised to build a home together, not four walls, but a place where laughter could be louder than rules. Now, she lived at an address that belonged to his story, to his mother's biography, to the geography of portraits. The house was theirs, but the narrative was not. And it is at this very point that love must choose between becoming an accomplice of order or becoming the courage to found a new order. She placed her hand on her belly, not yet knowing that inside beat a different clock, discreet and absolute, capable of rearranging constellations. When he entered the room, he found her quiet, her gaze distant, a false peace around her. He sat beside her, touched her shoulder lightly, asked if everything was all right. "It is," she said, and smiled the most polite version of a cry for help. He believed her because he needed to believe, because reality, when it explodes, scatters shards that do not choose where they fall. He kissed her forehead, promised a short trip on the next holiday, spoke of a plan to save for an apartment, a place of our own. Those expressions that work like lanterns lit in the middle of a blackout. She nodded, wishing the future would arrive before the next breakfast, and went on folding her blouse carefully, as if, by aligning fabric, she could align destiny. In the living room, the mother-in-law turned off the TV and, without looking, said loud enough to reach the bedroom, "Remember to turn off the lights. The electricity bill came high." And the banal phrase completed the map of that house, with 3 invisible walls, where everything seems normal and yet nothing breathes free. If there was something the young man's mother knew how to do with mastery, it was to wear masks. To the outside world, she was the perfect image of a respectable woman. Polite, generous, helpful with the neighbors, always with a sweet word on the tip of her tongue. She was that lady who offered cake to passers-by, who helped with the church fundraisers, and who received warm greetings from everyone who knew her. But as soon as the door of the house closed, that layer of kindness shattered, revealing the rigidity of someone who never accepted losing the role of protagonist in her son's life. The mother-in-law, within 4 walls, became a harsh figure, with a look of permanent judgment, capable of finding flaws even where none existed. The young wife, while preparing breakfast, was forced to listen to veiled criticisms. In my time, the bread was softer. If she placed flowers on the table, irony came. "Pretty, but they are already wilting. You don't know how to choose properly." If the husband discreetly praised the food, the mother cut in. "He only says that out of politeness, because he has always liked my recipe better." Small attacks, thrown like stones, accumulated in the daughter-in-law's mind, making her feel forever inferior, inadequate, out of place in that home that was never truly hers. The young man, naive or perhaps blinded by filial affection, saw only his mother's public face. When she laughed loudly in front of the neighbors or showed caring attention in front of guests, he believed everything was fine. He never noticed the cutting glance, the grip on the arm, or the poisonous whisper she fired at his wife the moment they were alone. To him, his mother was an example of strength and dedication, and when the wife complained, she seemed merely too sensitive. That emotional blindness, was what kept the mother-in-law's control intact. The young wife, in turn, began to feel as though she lived in two parallel worlds. In the first, in public, she had to sustain the theater that everything was fine, smile at the neighbors, walk hand in hand with her husband as if she were happy. In the second, in private, she had to swallow disguised insults, subtle attacks that left no physical marks but corroded her inside. It was a perverse game, because if she tried to tell the truth, it would sound like madness. How could such a kind woman, respected by all, be cruel? Isolation, then, grew like a shadow in her soul. The power of the mother-in-law's mask lay precisely in that, in contradiction. The sweeter she was in front of others, the crueler she allowed herself to be at home. The more praised she was by the community, the more authoritarian she felt in intimacy. For the daughter-in-law, this became a prison without escape, because her word would never carry the same weight as the older woman's. And so, day after day, she was forced to watch her husband blindly trust someone who was silently destroying her, without him realizing the damage. But even the best constructed masks eventually begin to crack, and although at that moment the young man still did not notice, small fissures were already forming. The excessively protective tone of the mother, the way she pushed the wife aside from certain decisions, the looks of discomfort the young woman tried to hide, all of it, still concealed, was already preparing the ground for the revelation that would change the fate of that divided home. In that house where the air always seemed heavier than it should be, silence was the young wife's greatest enemy. It was not the serene silence of someone resting after a long day, but the dense, suffocating silence that carried within it all the unspoken words, all the swallowed screams, all the hidden tears. It was the silence of someone who learns by force that speaking changes nothing, that complaining only brings more pain, that revealing one's own suffering is opening the guard for an even crueler blow. Day by day, the daughter-in-law withdrew further into herself, and her body began to translate into signs what her mouth could no longer say. The nights became long, sleepless dawns. In bed beside her husband, she remained awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart racing for reasons she could not even name. She tried to turn discreetly, not to disturb him, but every movement seemed to denounce her unrest. He slept deeply, believing the silence of the bedroom was peace, while for her, it was prison. The pillow, soaked in silent tears, was the only witness to the storm forming in her soul. And when the sun rose in the morning, bringing with it the noise of routine, she forced a smile, disguising the marks of a nightly war fought alone. During the day, silence took on another form. At the breakfast table, when the mother-in-law made disguised criticisms, the daughter-in-law no longer answered. At lunch, when the husband praised his mother, she simply lowered her head. In the small conversations of daily life, she chose not to say anything, because she knew that any word could be used against her. This involuntary mutism, which at first was only a defense, began to corrode her identity. Who was she? Where had the young dreamer gone, full of plans, who believed in the future? Only a shadow remained, someone who preferred silence to the risk of being wounded again. Little by little, the daughter-in-law's body began to react to that invisible prison. Her appetite disappeared, and meals became torment. Her clothes started to hang loose, denouncing the weight loss she tried to hide. The sparkle in her eyes gave way to a weary, distant look, as if she were gazing beyond the walls of that house. Silence, once only a shield, had turned into something lethal, consuming her vitality, robbing her of joy, draining her hope. She walked through the corridors like a ghost, present but absent, alive, but as if she were slowly ceasing to exist. The husband, immersed in the routine of work and blind trust in his mother, noticed the change, but attributed everything to stress, to the common responsibilities of life. He tried to console her with empty phrases like, "It will pass, it's just a phase," without realizing that what was killing his wife was not a phase, but his absence. The absence of listening, of support, of defense. And with every word left unsaid, with every gesture left unseen, he contributed to the suffocating silence that imprisoned her. The daughter-in-law's silence, however, was not only pain, it was also a plea for help. Each time she kept quiet, she screamed inside. Each time she smiled to disguise it, it was as if she were begging for someone to truly see her. But at that moment, no one seemed willing to listen. Neither the husband, blind in his loyalty, nor the mother-in-law, cruel in her vigilance. All that remained was the loneliness of a heart that was slowly breaking, invisible, behind the walls of that divided house. That silence, suffocating and painful, could not last forever. Because a human heart, when pressed too hard, either explodes in pain or decides to flee to survive. And the young wife was already beginning to understand that, if she wanted to save herself, perhaps she would have to choose the hardest path, that of leaving. The young man lived as if walking on two bridges that crossed without ever touching. On one side was his mother, the figure who had raised him alone, who had cradled him through nights of fever, who had worked double to give him education and support, who had built her entire life around him. On the other was his wife, the woman he had chosen to love, who dreamed of a future together, who gave herself fully to the relationship, even at the cost of her strength. He found himself divided between two loyalties that cancelled each other out, the eternal gratitude to his mother and the commitment to protect and love his wife. But in his blindness, he believed he could balance the two without realizing that, in practice, he always leaned toward the stronger side, and that side was his mother's. In his heart, there was true love for his wife. He cherished the way she listened to him, the delicacy of her gestures, the way she lit up heavy days with nothing but her presence. He dreamed of children, of a home just for the two of them, of freedom. But in his mind, there was an invisible weight, his mother's voice, echoing since forever, reminding him that he owed everything to her, that his life was only possible because of her sacrifices, that any misstep could be an act of ingratitude. It was as if, even as an adult, he was still an obedient boy, unable to see that it was time to build his own choices. Every time his wife tried to talk about what she felt, he found himself in the middle of a battle he did not want to fight. When she cried, begging him to see his mother's offenses, he answered with rehearsed excuses. "You're just tired, that's all. She doesn't mean any harm. It's just her way. Don't let these little things get in the way of what we have." He did not realize that by minimizing his wife's pain, he was unintentionally betraying her. In trying to protect his mother, he hurt his wife. In trying to keep the peace, he fed the silent war that corroded his home. He believed he was on the fence, but in truth, he had already chosen a side, his mother's. And that unconscious, constant choice split the young woman's heart in two. He did not see the downcast eyes, the hidden tears, her body weakening day by day. He was so used to his mother's harshness that he did not realize it was not normal, that what looked like discipline was in fact cruelty, that what sounded like care was actually control. He lived anesthetized by an old loyalty, unable to see that the woman beside him was withering before his eyes. Even so, inside him, something began to stir. There were moments when his wife flinched at the sound of his mother's footsteps in the hallway, and his heart tightened without explanation. There were instants when the young woman's joy suddenly went out, and he felt that something was wrong. But he always hurried to push those thoughts away, preferring to believe the comfortable version, that his mother was incapable of cruelty, that his wife was simply too sensitive. That refusal to see was both shield and prison. The young man lived divided, not understanding that by trying to please the two most important women in his life, he ended up betraying them both. His mother, because he lacked the courage to be the complete independent man she should have taught him to become. His wife, because he could not be the protector, the companion, the safe harbor she so desperately needed. And so he allowed silence to keep suffocating the house, as if nothing could be done. His heart, though full of love, was a heart in denial. But every denial has a price, and his was about to be collected in a painful way. In that divided home, the young man still believed he could remain neutral, but he did not know that neutrality, in the face of injustice, always means choosing the side of the oppressor. Time would reveal this truth in a devastating way, but until then, the wife would continue to wither, and the mother would continue to rule, while he remained trapped in his own emotional blindness. It was in the refuge of the bathroom that she found the only space where she could allow herself to be whole. There, surrounded by cold tiles and a mirror that no longer reflected the same woman she once believed she was, the young wife allowed herself to break in silence. The sound of running water from the faucet was the perfect disguise. It covered the sobs, muffled the crying, made it seem as if nothing unusual was happening. While outside, the house continued with its daily noises, the clinking of pans, the television in the living room, the firm footsteps of the mother-in-law in the hallway. Inside that narrow space unfolded an intimate and solitary drama. The tears came without warning, like a tide that invades the sand, even when the sun is still shining. All it took was a cutting phrase, a look heavy with disdain, or even a gesture of indifference for her heart to break into more pieces. She tried to resist, bite her lips, hide it, but her body could not hold so much repressed pain. And when she finally locked herself in the bathroom, she let her eyes speak what her mouth could never say aloud. The exhaustion of living under constant judgment, the feeling of being an intruder in her own home, the weight of not finding in her husband the safe harbor she so longed for. Deep down, she did not want him to see her like that. She loved him too much to let her suffering be interpreted as weakness. She knew that if she cried in front of him, perhaps she would be diminished with words she had heard before. "You're too sensitive. My mother didn't mean it like that. You need to get used to it." That is why she kept her tears to herself, hiding them behind locked doors and the noise of running water. The bathroom had thus become a confessional without a priest, where she deposited her sorrows in the hope that one day they would be washed away by time. There were nights when, lying beside him, the tears slid silently onto the pillow. There was no scream, no sob, only a mute weeping, flowing like a hidden river among stones. In those moments, she asked herself how two people could be so close physically and, at the same time, so distant emotionally. His body there, warm, was proof of presence, but his soul, distant, was proof of absence. And that absence was even more cruel than any word from the mother-in-law, because it came from the very one from whom she most expected support. Over time, the tears began to leave invisible marks. Her face grew more drawn, her eyes lost their brightness, her voice grew lower. He even noticed something strange, but attributed it to tiredness, to the stress of daily life, never to the possibility that his mother could be the cause. The wife then accepted the loneliness of her pain, as if crying in secret were the only way to preserve both her dignity and her love. Because, as paradoxical as it was, she still believed that enduring in silence was better than losing the man she loved. The hidden tears were not only an expression of sadness, they were also resistance. Each guarded cry was a way of surviving, a reminder that she still felt, that she was still human. Because when the tears disappear completely, it is a sign that the heart has turned to stone. And she, despite all the suffering, still dreamed, still desired, still hoped. It was that thread of hope that made her compose herself, wash her face, open the bathroom door, and smile as if nothing had happened. It was that thread that kept her standing, even when her soul begged to collapse. In that divided home, every hidden tear was like a muffled scream that echoed only inside her. And if no one heard her, if no one saw her, fate would eventually collect the price. Because there is no silence that lasts forever, nor pain that can be suffocated eternally. And little by little, the weight of the hidden tears would turn into an abyss between her and everyone around her. In the building, almost no one noticed. The closed curtains, the rehearsed smiles, and the mother-in-law's polished manners created the illusion of a harmonious home, of a family as tranquil as so many others. But one man, discreet and solitary, who lived in the apartment next door, began to notice that something did not fit. The neighbor, unintentionally, became a witness to fragments of a truth that few would dare to believe. It was in the details that he perceived what others ignored. The altered tone of the mother-in-law, which slipped through the thin walls and turned into an aggressive murmur. The sound of dishes clattering louder than they should. The hurried footsteps of the daughter-in-law in the hallway, as if always in a rush to flee a suffocating environment. The greetings exchanged in the building's hall also revealed her pain. A broken smile, a wilted, "good evening," an evasive glance that avoided direct contact. The neighbor, attentive, knew how to read in human expressions what lips refused to say. Over time, he began to notice that the young wife had lost weight, that her clothes no longer fit her as before, that her shoulders were always slumped, as if carrying an invisible burden. Sometimes she returned from the market with poorly balanced bags, and yet she refused help, as if she did not want anyone to get too close. fearing to reveal what was happening inside the house. There was a haste in the way she moved, an anxiety disguised as busyness, which revealed far more than she wanted to show. He also perceived the contradiction. When he encountered the mother-in-law, she always had sweet words, loudly spoke about how she cared for her son and daughter-in-law, and bragged about their united family. But her gaze, hard and cold, did not match her speech. The neighbor had seen this type of disguise before in others, the mask of perfection that covers a domineering soul. It was clear that behind the facade, something was wrong, something no one else dared to question. On some afternoons, the neighbor, sitting near his window, overheard fragmented conversations coming from the house next door. Words were thrown like arrows. "You're not good enough for him. This house isn't yours. If it weren't for me, he'd have nothing." Then came a long silence, as if someone had swallowed their own response. In those moments, his heart tightened, because he knew the one who kept quiet was not the mother-in-law. It was the daughter-in-law, suffocated, without the courage to face the authority of that voice that wounded so deeply. He thought about intervening, but he did not know how. After all, who would believe his observations? The son, so blinded by maternal love, would hardly listen, and the daughter-in-law, ashamed, would probably deny everything, fearing reprisals. All that remained for him was to observe, to witness, to collect invisible evidence in his memory. Still, he felt a growing sense of responsibility, because no matter that he was not family, no matter that he had no direct bond, he could not turn his face away from another's suffering. In time, that neighbor would become the key to revelation. He carried within himself the truth that no one else had the courage to see. And when the time came, his words would be like a mirror placed before the young man, forcing him to confront what he had always refused to acknowledge. Until then, the neighbor would remain silent, observing, waiting, gathering courage, because he knew that one day the weight of the truth could no longer be hidden behind the closed curtains of that divided home. The day came when the weight became unbearable. It was no longer just sharp words, looks of contempt, or small daily humiliations. It was the accumulation of all of it inside her, like stones tied to the feet of someone trying to swim. Her body was weaker, her mind exhausted, and her heart broken. The young wife realized that if she stayed there, she would lose herself completely. There was no more room to breathe, no strength to pretend. And so, in silence, she began to prepare her departure. There was no argument, no explosion, no scream. She knew that if she tried to confront, she would lose, because the mother-in-law would turn any word into a weapon, any tear into proof of weakness. That is why she chose silence. On an ordinary morning, she waited for her husband to leave for work and for her mother-in-law to be busy in the kitchen. She entered the bedroom, opened the wardrobe, and with trembling hands began folding some clothes. She did not take much, only what was necessary, a few pieces, documents, and discreet mementos. She packed everything into a small suitcase, trying not to make noise, as if every zipper could betray her escape. Before leaving, she looked one last time at the room that was supposed to be the couple's refuge, but had never truly belonged to her. There were the walls that had heard her hidden cries, the pillows that had kept silent tears, the wardrobe where her dreams had been boxed away with no space left. She touched the furniture with her fingertips, like someone saying goodbye to a part of herself, and took a deep breath. She knew she would not return the same. She also knew she was not leaving alone. Inside her, she carried an even greater secret, a life beginning to stir, a tiny heart beating in rhythm with hers. She was pregnant. The path to the door was the longest of her life. Each step felt like it weighed tons. Each movement hurt, as if she were betraying herself and the man she still loved. But there was no other choice. If she wanted to protect the child growing in her womb, she first had to save herself. Leaving was not only an escape, it was survival. As she turned the doorknob, her heart raced like never before. She did not look back. She simply left, closing the door with the same delicacy as someone ending a painful chapter. Outside, the world seemed different. The air was lighter, the sky more open. Even the street noises had a different tone. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, she could truly breathe. She carried the small suitcase in one hand and, in her heart, the immense weight of uncertainty. She did not know where she would sleep that night, nor how she would explain her absence, but she was certain that inside that house, it was no longer possible to exist. The street, however harsh, was still freedom. The neighbor, seeing her leave with the small suitcase, immediately realized this was not a simple visit. In her eyes was a mixture of sadness and determination, like someone saying goodbye to something she loved but could not keep. He said nothing, only followed her with his eyes, silently recording that moment. He knew that soon the young man would notice her absence. He also knew that the truth was beginning to reveal itself to everyone. That day, the house became emptier, colder. The young man, upon returning, would notice the different silence, the absence of familiar scents, the lack of small details that had always marked her presence. But before fully understanding the reason for her departure, he would still have to face the revelation that was to come. Meanwhile, the young wife walked alone, carrying not only a suitcase, but the hope of beginning again, even though filled with wounds. The house had never seemed so big. When the young man walked in after an ordinary day at work, he immediately felt the emptiness, as if the air itself had changed density. There was no smell of the coffee she always prepared to welcome him, nor the sound of her light footsteps rushing to meet him at the door. The silence he once confused with peace now felt like a deep well, an endless echo bouncing against the walls. The small suitcase she had taken left no trace, but her absence was deafening. At first, he thought it was something temporary. Maybe she had gone to visit someone. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she just wanted to breathe. He repeated these explanations to himself like someone trying to glue back together a torn photograph. But when he entered the bedroom, he felt the real impact. Half of the closet was empty. The clothes that always brought color to the space had disappeared, leaving only lonely hangers. Her pillow, still sunken with her shape, exhaled the gentle perfume that had always soothed him. He sat on the bed and, for the first time in a long time, his heart truly weighed. The mother-in-law, noticing her son's unease, quickly seized control of the narrative. With a restrained smile and a calculated tone, she said perhaps his wife had no structure for that life, that she was too delicate, even ungrateful, for not recognizing the effort that house represented. She said sooner or later she would return, because no one in the world would care for him like his own mother. Her words were loaded with poison disguised as comfort, and the young man, still lost, tried to believe them. But the emptiness in his chest contradicted every justification. The days that followed were grey. Breakfast without her presence tasted bitter. Lunch was just colourless routine. At night, he lay down on a mattress bigger than he needed, surrounded by shadows that filled nothing. He began to notice details that had once gone unseen. The silence in the kitchen, the absence of small notes she used to leave, the disappearance of laughter that had broken monotony. He finally felt that something precious had been torn from his life. At work, his focus was no longer the same. On the way home, he lingered in front of shop windows, as if trying to delay arriving at a house that was no longer a home. There was a constant pain in his chest, as if he had lost something whose value he was only now beginning to understand. And each day without her was a cruel reminder that he had not heard her pleas, had not seen her signs, had not understood how hard she had been fighting in silence. Absence began to turn into guilt, a guilt growing like a shadow with every sunrise. Still, he did not understand the real reason for her departure. He believed the marriage was only facing ordinary difficulties, that maybe she was too sensitive or tired of routine. He could not see that the root of the pain was closer than he imagined, sitting at the table every morning, disguised under the mask of a caring mother. The young man did not know it yet, but his world was about to be turned upside down when the truth was revealed. Until then, all he had left was an absence that hurt more than any physical wound, because loneliness, when born from losing the one you love, is like an echo repeating endlessly inside the chest. And he, lost in that emptiness, began to realize that nothing, absolutely nothing, had taste or meaning without her by his side. The neighbor had remained silent for far too long. He had witnessed the looks, heard the murmurs, and seen the shadow that fell upon the young woman whenever the mother-in-law drew near. He had kept to himself the fragments of truth that piled up like stones in his throat, fearing being misunderstood. fearing getting involved in a story that was not his to tell. But when he realized the young wife had left, carrying only a suitcase and an empty gaze, he understood that his silence could cost far too much. It was time to speak. The young man, consumed by her absence, wandered lost, without answers. It was then that the neighbor approached him, in a casual encounter in the building's hall. The tone of his voice lacked the lightness of polite neighborly exchanges. It was grave, firm, and carried a weight that could not be disguised. "I need to tell you something," he began, and the young man's heart raced as if it already knew life was about to change. The neighbor's weary eyes reflected the seriousness of someone who could no longer bear to watch suffering in silence. The words came raw, without embellishment. He recounted what he had heard through the walls, the muffled insults, the venomous remarks, the constant comparisons. He described the times he had seen the young wife pass through the hallway with a downcast face, barely hidden tears, and lowered eyes. He spoke of the mother-in-law's shouts, disguised behind closed doors, but still strong enough to pierce through the silence of the building. He said, with no hesitation, that the young woman had not left out of weakness, but because she had been crushed by the cruelty of his mother. The young man listened in shock. At first he wanted to deny it, as one rejects a death sentence. His mother, the one who had sacrificed everything for him, who carried on her back the story of his difficult childhood, who had always been an example of dedication. It could not be, but as the neighbor spoke, pieces began to fall into place. He remembered the looks of pain on his wife's face, the hidden tears he had pretended not to see, the times she had tried to speak and he had silenced her with empty excuses. He remembered the controlled expressions, the shrinking posture, the voice that seemed to grow smaller over time. Denial dissolved like ice under the sun, and in its place was born a deep anguish. The neighbor used no half measures. He said plainly that remaining silent in the face of such things was cowardice, that he, as a husband, needed to open his eyes before it was too late. He spoke with firmness, but also with compassion, knowing that the revelation was like tearing away a veil that for years had hidden the truth. When he finished, he left the young man alone, drowning in crushing thoughts. He asked for nothing in return, sought no recognition. He simply fulfilled the duty of one who can no longer stand idly by in the face of human suffering. The truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. It echoes in the mind, rips through the heart, and transforms everything around it. The young man felt the world collapse beneath his feet. His mother, his lifelong reference, was also the cause of his marriage's ruin. His wife, whom he had so often accused of exaggeration, was in truth the victim of daily torment, and he, who should have been her protector, had become her accomplice through blindness. The revelation not only devastated him, it also planted the seed of a guilt that could never be erased. In that moment, the young man understood that nothing would ever be the same. What he had heard was not just a neighbor's account. It was a mirror placed before him, revealing his omission, his cowardice, his inability to see beyond the walls of his own home. The secret had been revealed, and now it was up to him to decide: continue to be a prisoner of manipulation, or rise, though in pain, to fight for the love he had let slip away. The neighbor's words would not stop echoing in the young man's mind. He paced through the living room like someone who had just lost the ground beneath his feet, feeling his heart crushed under the weight of the revelation. It was as if a curtain had been ripped from his eyes by force, leaving reality naked, cruel, and impossible to ignore. The mother, who all his life had been the center of his universe, now appeared in a shadowy light, revealed as the author of the torments of the woman he loved. The wife, whom he had so often accused of exaggeration, had been right all along, and he, the husband who had sworn to be her protector, had been nothing but a blind accomplice. The shock came accompanied by an overwhelming wave of memories. Every sad look from his wife now became an accusation. Every night she curled up in bed, every time she said, "I'm fine," with a trembling voice, every tear hidden in the bathroom, all of it returned to his memory like scenes from a film he had refused to watch. And now he understood. It was not sensitivity, not exaggeration, not fatigue. It was real pain. Pain he had ignored out of cowardice, out of fear of confronting his own mother, out of unwillingness to shatter the perfect image he had carried all his life. He felt small, ashamed, betrayed, and above all, guilty. Guilty for not having been the man he promised to be, for not giving his wife the shelter she deserved, for having closed his eyes when she most needed him to open them. Guilt gnawed at every fibre of his being, and the house, once familiar, now felt like a courtroom where the walls judged him in silence. Every object reminded him of an omission. Every corner held a ghost of what he had let happen. When he tried to look at his mother that night, he no longer saw her with the same eyes. Her mask, still intact before her son, now seemed grotesque, a caricature of kindness hiding poison. The smile that had always seemed warm now looked cold, almost threatening. For the first time, he felt fear, not of physical violence, but of realizing he had lived an entire life under manipulation, molded like a puppet who never noticed the strings. And that fear turned into anger. Anger at himself for allowing it, and anger at her for destroying what he held most precious. Alone in the bedroom, the young man cried as he had not done since childhood. He cried for the lost love, for the wife who had left pregnant without him knowing, for the broken trust, for the innocence ripped away. He cried because he finally understood the depth of the pain she had carried in silence, while he, blind, had called her oversensitive. The awareness of his own failure was unbearable, and he wondered if he still had a chance to repair, to seek forgiveness, to recover what he had let slip away. The shock was not only revelation, it was rebirth. In that instant, the young man died as the obedient son and was born as a man torn between pain and the urgent need to act. He knew he could not erase the past, but he understood that the future would only have meaning if built alongside the woman he loved and the life she carried in her womb. The shock, brutal and devastating, opened space for a decision. Either he would confront his mother and all the consequences of it, or he would live condemned forever to the guilt of having destroyed his own home. He searched for her with the urgency of someone carrying a heart on fire in his chest. The neighbor's words, the guilt corroding him, and the emptiness of the house pushed him into the streets like a desperate man. He looked in obvious places: a friend's house, the square she liked, the little bakery they used to visit on Sundays. But he did not find her. Each absence was a new wound. Each street corner without an answer deepened the feeling that perhaps it was already too late. Until one late afternoon, as he turned a street near the neighborhood market, he saw her from afar. She walked slowly, her hand resting on her still discreet belly, already with an instinctive gesture of protection. His heart raced. His feet, heavy as lead, hesitated before running toward her. When he finally reached her, his breath was ragged, not from physical effort, but from the devastating mixture of emotions. When she saw him, she froze. Her tired eyes reflected both surprise and caution, like someone who meets again a person both loved and feared at the same time. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. He only extended his hand, trembling, as if asking permission to come closer. She stepped back, instinctively, not out of lack of love, but out of fear of being hurt again. That was when he realized the truth before him. Her belly, the small gesture of protection, the life pulsing in secret. The whole world stopped. A mixture of pain and joy overwhelmed his heart. Pain, because she had lived that pregnancy alone until that moment. Joy, because inside her was a piece of him, a living proof of the love they had shared. With tears in his eyes, he finally found his voice. "I didn't know. Please forgive me." The words came trembling, loaded with regret. She, however, remained silent. Her silence was no longer suffocation. It was choice. She wanted to hear from him not just apologies, but a clear decision. Would he continue being the submissive son of a domineering mother, or at last the husband capable of protecting her? The reunion, more than a scene of love, was a definitive test. He moved closer, carefully, and knelt before her, touching her belly gently, without forcing. The gesture was timid, but sincere, and his eyes filled with tears at the thought of the tiny heart beating inside. "I promise I will never close my eyes again. I promise I will fight for you and for our child," he said, and his voice, though shaky, carried the firmness of someone who had finally seen reality. She cried too, but her eyes reflected caution. Love was still there, alive, but wounded. The unexpected reunion brought to the surface both hope and accumulated pain. There was still a hard road ahead, scars to heal, barriers to break, but for the first time in a long while, she saw in his eyes something different. Not the blindness of before, but the determination of a man who had finally chosen the right side. In that instant, amid the noise of cars and hurried footsteps in the street, they stood still, as if the world had stopped to witness the beginning of a new story. It was not an easy restart, but it was the chance to rebuild what had been destroyed. The unexpected reunion sealed the certainty that despite all the pain, love still breathed. After the reunion, he returned home with a heart in conflict, but for the first time in many years, the balance of his soul began to lean to the right side. He walked down the hallway like someone crossing a silent battlefield, looking at each photograph hanging on the wall and wondering how many of them were memories of true love and how many were just records of a life marked by blind obedience. When he opened the bedroom door and saw the empty bed, the pillow without her scent, and her absence in every corner, he understood once and for all. It was no longer possible to go on living divided. It was time to choose. All his life, his mother had been the figure who set the rules, shaped his view of the world, and sustained the narrative of sacrifice. He had grown up believing that he owed her every achievement, every step, every breath. But now he realized that this maternal love had turned into a prison. There was gratitude, yes, but also manipulation. There was affection, yes, but also control. And in that control, he had lost what was essential: the chance to build his own life, to love freely, to protect the woman he had chosen. Now, thinking of the child growing in his wife's womb, he understood that his loyalty could no longer be divided. The decision did not come lightly. It was like breaking chains that had been fastened for decades. He spent hours pacing the apartment, his mind in turmoil, his breathing heavy. He remembered the neighbor, the courage to expose the truth, and his wife's tears, hidden behind silences. Each memory was a stab, but also a push. And then, in a moment of clarity, he realized he could no longer postpone it. If he wanted to save his marriage, and above all, if he wanted to give his child the chance to grow up in a healthy home, he had to confront his mother, not as an obedient boy, but as a man who had chosen his own family. That night, sitting at the dining table, he waited for his mother to appear. She came, as always, with firm steps, confident, certain that her control remained intact. Seeing him serious, with steady eyes and no longer burdened by the submission of before, she raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What is it, my son? Why that face?" The question, spoken with false sweetness, was the trigger. He took a deep breath, and for the first time, he did not hesitate. "Mother, I know everything." The silence that followed was dense, heavier than any insult. She tried to laugh, to dismiss it, to say it was just gossip from the neighbor, but he was no longer fooled. He spoke of every humiliation, every venomous word, every manipulation she had thrown against his wife. He spoke of the hidden tears, the suffering he had ignored, the pregnancy that now made him even more responsible. And with a trembling but firm voice, he declared, "From now on, I choose her. I choose my family. I choose my child. I will not close my eyes anymore." The mother, who had always believed she was in control, remained silent for a few seconds. Her gaze was a mixture of shock and disbelief. She stood before the son she had raised to be obedient, but who now stood as an independent man. For the first time, her authority had no effect. The decision was already made. He knew it would hurt. He knew he could lose ties, but he also knew there was no other way. Because love, when true, demands courage, and his courage, though late, had finally been born. That night, he slept little, but when he closed his eyes, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: lightness. The decision had been made, and even though the battle was far from over, he knew the first step had been taken. For his wife, for his child, and for himself, he had chosen to be free. The next morning was born heavy with tension, as if even the air knew that something was about to change forever inside that house. The young man woke up different. He was no longer the son who accepted everything in silence, no longer the man divided between two worlds. He got up with firm steps, his heart racing but resolute. He knew that this would be the day to face his mother head-on, to undo years of manipulation, to open the windows of a suffocated home so that the truth could finally breathe. He found her in the kitchen, as usual, surrounded by pots and by the aura of power she had always held in that space. The mother-in-law did not immediately notice the weight in his gaze. She spoke of trivial things, commented on grocery prices, criticized the neighbor's noise, but he was not listening. He sat at the table, fixed his eyes on her, and when she finally noticed, she fell silent. The silence that followed was stronger than any spoken word. "Mother, we need to talk." The phrase, though simple, fell on her like a sentence. She tried to smile, to respond lightly, but what she found on her son's face was something she had never seen before. Firmness. He continued, his voice breaking but clear. "I know everything. I know what you did to her. I know the humiliations. I know the venomous words. I know what she endured every day under this roof." The mother-in-law widened her eyes in surprise, but quickly tried to compose herself. "This is all invention, my son. Gossiping neighbors, people who want to separate us. You know I have always done everything for you." The old discourse, full of guilt and memories of sacrifice that had for so long kept him captive. But this time, it did not work. He slammed his hand on the table with force as he had never dared before. "Enough, mother. I am not a child anymore. You will no longer manipulate what I feel. You hurt the woman I love. You almost destroyed our family, and I will not allow this to continue." She tried to retaliate, her voice rising in desperation. She spoke of sleepless nights caring for him, of sacrifices, of years of struggle, but each word seemed smaller against the pain he now saw clearly. "All of that doesn't give you the right to trample the one I love," he answered, with tears in his eyes. "What you call care was control. What you call devotion was cruelty. You may be my mother, but I am a husband, and I will protect my wife. And more, she is pregnant, mother. Did you hear me? Pregnant. And I will not allow my child to grow up in the same suffocating environment I grew up in." The shock struck the woman like lightning. For the first time, she lost her ground. The revelation of the pregnancy was a blow she had not expected. The mother-in-law, who had always prided herself on controlling every detail, now saw the future slipping out of her hands. She tried to argue once more, but her voice came out weak, trembling. Her son, however, did not waver. He stood up, looked her straight in the eyes, and finished. "I choose her. I choose my child. If you want to be present, you will have to change. Otherwise, you will live alone inside the walls you yourself built." The final confrontation was not just an argument between mother and son. It was the collapse of a fortress built over decades. It was the first time the son she had molded dared to break the chains. The mother-in-law, for the first time, saw something in her son's eyes she had never expected: independence. And even though her heart was torn apart by rage and fear of losing control, something inside her also began to tremble, a premonition that life would no longer obey her rules. Time passed heavy with tension, but also with expectation. The young wife, though still wounded by the memories of the suffocating house, found in her growing belly the strength to move forward. Each beat of the tiny heart was a promise of a new beginning. Each subtle movement inside her, a reminder that, despite the pain, life insisted on blooming. The husband, now awakened, had become a present and protective companion. He stood by her at every appointment, in every sleepless night, in every moment when the weight of the past threatened to bring her down. For the first time, she did not feel alone. And then the day arrived. Between the walls of a modest room, surrounded by the strong cry of a newborn baby, their world transformed. The husband, with tears in his eyes, held for the first time in his arms the small life that carried not only his blood, but also the chance to repair mistakes, to rebuild what had been broken. The baby, so small and fragile, seemed to bring in his innocent gaze the power to reconcile broken hearts. Seeing him, the mother smiled as she had not smiled in months. It was as if all the pain had finally found meaning. The news spread quickly, and the mother-in-law, once unyielding, could not resist her curiosity. She approached with measured steps, as if afraid to enter unfamiliar territory. The atmosphere was different. It was no longer the house where she dictated the rules. but a new space, filled with the love that had been born with that child. When her eyes met her grandson's, a deep silence took hold of her soul. For the first time in a long while, she found no words of criticism, no arguments of control. Everything dissolved in the face of the baby's pure gaze. The daughter-in-law, though still hurt, allowed the mother-in-law to come closer. There was no resentment in that moment, only the awareness that the innocent love of a child could open fissures even in the hardest stone. The grandmother extended her arms carefully, and the son, hesitating, let her hold him. The baby's weight in her arms was like a shock. Small, fragile, dependent. The baby's eyes opened, finding hers, and in that gaze without judgment, without past, without grievance, something inside the woman broke. It was as if, suddenly, all the power she had exercised for years revealed itself to be useless in the face of such pure life. That gaze asked for nothing but love. It demanded no control, owed no obedience, recalled no debts. It simply existed, innocent and vulnerable. And in that gaze, the mother-in-law felt something she had not felt in a long time. Shame. Shame for having become a bitter woman, for having hurt someone who only wanted to love her son, for having confused care with possession. For the first time, her tears came, not of anger, but of regret. The husband, watching, felt his heart grow heavier and lighter at the same time. It was as if the cycle was beginning to close. The wife, still cautious, observed in silence, but inside her grew the hope that perhaps this baby was the bridge capable of transforming the story. Because where words and confrontations had failed, the innocence of a grandchild could build bridges. In that moment, 3 generations were gathered in silence. The grandmother, broken within, the son, finally independent, and the daughter-in-law, reborn through motherhood. At the center of it all, the baby, a living symbol that true love is capable of breaking even the oldest chains. The grandson's first gaze did not only touch the grandmother, it forever changed the fate of that divided home. Silence took over the room when the grandmother returned the baby to the mother's arms. The tears streaming down her face were different this time. They were not tears of anger, nor of wounded pride, but of deep remorse, the kind that is born when someone finally stands face to face with their own moral ruin. She needed no one to accuse her. For every memory of her cruel words, every hidden humiliation, every look of disdain came back like invisible daggers, pressing heavily against her chest. For the first time in a long time, she was not the woman who dictated rules, nor the mistress of the house. She was simply a grandmother, standing before a child who demanded from her what she had never known how to give: pure love, without conditions, without control, without manipulation. The husband, steady, yet broken inside, observed in silence. He carried the weight of guilt for having taken so long to see the truth, but also the determination that from that day forward, everything would be different. He looked at his mother, not with hatred, but with firmness. "Mother, I don't want war anymore. I just want peace. Not for me, but for him," he said, pointing to the baby sleeping peacefully in his wife's arms. Those words were like a turning point. The mother understood, without needing further explanation, that she no longer had the power she once wielded. Her son was no longer the obedient boy, but the man who had chosen to protect his family, even if it cost him his relationship with her. The daughter-in-law, holding the baby, breathed deeply. There were still open wounds, pains that perhaps would never fully heal. But when she looked at her mother-in-law, she saw something she had never seen before: vulnerability. She was no longer the proud woman, but someone broken, repentant, silently asking for a chance to begin again. The maternal instinct, now beating stronger than ever inside her, spoke louder. For whoever learns to love a child also learns to forgive, even when that forgiveness is not easy. And then it happened. A simple gesture, yet one capable of changing destinies. The mother-in-law, trembling, approached slowly. She did not ask for forgiveness with words, but extended her arms hesitantly. The husband looked at his wife, and she, in silence, stepped forward. With the baby between them, the two women embraced. It was an embrace filled with tears, painful memories, and unresolved grievances, but also with hope. An embrace that did not erase the past, but announced the possibility of a different future. In that instant, the invisible walls that had divided the house for so long began to collapse. There were no more winners or losers, only people scarred by pain who, at last, found in love the chance to rebuild. The baby, at the center of that embrace, became the bridge between two women once separated by resentment, now united by the life he represented. The young man, moved, stepped closer, and wrapped his arms around them both, completing at last a perfect circle. The house, once divided, now breathed differently. It was no longer a territory of manipulation, but a space of rebirth. And though much remained to be rebuilt, that embrace proved that love, when true, is capable of tearing down walls, healing wounds, and uniting even the most distant hearts. And so, through tears and restrained smiles, a new family was born, stronger, freer, and above all, more united.